All right, dude, today what we're doing is talking about dealing with delay. Basically, on day 68 of the program, which for you, June, you've already accomplished that. One of the things we talk about is perseverance. And I introduced a concept about calling, testing, then commissioning. And the idea is, in that one teaching, we looked at, I don't know, I briefly gave a dozen examples that include Abraham, Moses, Joseph, David, Jesus, many examples to establish the biblical pattern, which is God calls someone. Like if you take David, God says, "You are going to be king," and he is anointed. And then there's a prolonged season of testing, and then is the commissioning. And so David is called to be king, he's anointed. He goes through years of surviving before he finally is commissioned and is crowned king. He takes the throne. So that middle part, the testing, many men do not know how to handle that phase. And a lot of men in the testing phase, they fail. And instead of receiving feedback from their failure and treating it as a teacher, they just give up. Or that testing phase takes longer than they want and they just quit. They just give up. And so today we're talking about the delay. And I'm telling you, it's inherent to, if it goes calling, testing, commissioning, the testing part. It almost always takes longer than we think. It almost always takes longer than we want. And that's okay. And I will give you three quick things for time's sake about what that looks like in terms of what do we do with the delay? Well, the first thing is that delay is an invitation into trust. And so in Psalm 27, 13 and 14, it says, "I remain confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart, and wait for the Lord." And so this waiting that we are instructed in Psalm 27, verse 14, is not necessarily about time. It's more about trust. So delay is an invitation into trust. Wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart, and wait for the Lord. And so when God invites you into something, whether it's a promise, a prophecy, a vision, anything that gets your hopes up, then what do you do when it takes longer than expected, when it stalls? Do you tighten down control? Do you try to manipulate the outcomes like we saw Abraham do that, right? Where God said, "Hey, I promise you a kid." And his wife said, "Why, I'm barren, we have a slave girl. Her name's Hagar. She's not barren and she's fertile. Go do the thing." Like, do we try to manipulate the outcome? Do we compromise our standards? Do we question God's goodness? Like, there's so many things, options on what do we do in the midst of delay. And no matter what kind of delay it is, it always challenges us and it exposes whether we trust God's timing, God's character, God's sovereignty, or not. And it makes me think of Isaiah 40, verse 31. It says, "Those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint." And so to me, delay is an invitation into trust. And when we put our hope in the Lord and we say, "You're the one that I choose to trust," we get to renew our strength. And so what this isn't waiting, the delay, it's not passivity. It is looking to the Lord and proactively anchoring our trust in Him and recalling, "Hey, let me meditate on His faithfulness and on His testimonies. I'm not going to sit here and complain and just brew and stew and grumble. Like, that is not partnering with the Lord. That is not being a responsible man in the testing phase, in the season of delay. Complaining is not being responsible. Instead, practicing faith is. And where does faith come from? Faith comes from hearing the word of God, is what Romans 10 tells us. And so during the delay, I don't want to have frustrated complaining. I want to continue to hear the word of the Lord and stand in faith on that. And sometimes that means I need to read my Bible out loud. Sometimes that means I need to remind myself of what God told me when we got started. When David is running for his life and living in caves, he had to probably go back and remember, "Hey, the prophet of God came and anointed me. I need to remember that instead of complaining about my, current situation, living in a cave. I'm going to, and I'm going to practice faith and remember, hey, God promised this. He anointed me. He invited me into this." And then, waiting is not entitlement. It is not like, "Hey, God said this, so I'm going to do nothing." and I know I'll get the outcome. No, if God invited us into this thing, then inevitably there's a character transformation along the way to mold us more into his likeness in terms of be, do, have. He said, hey, you can have this thing. Maybe you need to do something to get there. And it's like, if I just sit there passively, that is not faithful waiting in the delay. Instead, I want to, with humility, not entitlement, partner with the Lord and say, God, mold me into the man who is capable of stewarding what you have for me. And so, all that to say, we don't panic. We almost expect delay, and we go into it and we have a plan to fortify our hearts, and we trust the Lord's timing, right? David could have killed Saul and taken the throne, and he didn't seize the throne when he had the opportunity to. He said, I'm going to trust God's timing. And so delay is, you could look at it like a loyalty test, or you could look at it like, hey, it's a trust building activity with the Lord. Like, how beautiful. He's inviting us, hey, trust my faithfulness. And so the next thing I would look at would be the second part, is that delay develops our capacity before we step into the fullness of that assignment. And so what do I mean by that is James 1 talks about, consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance, and let perseverance have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. And so what's the point? If we are in a delay, a trial, if we are in that delay, then it is probably not God's way of punishing you. A lot of men fall into that lie. They believe, oh, I'm in a delay. God's mad at me. What did I screw up? How did I not steward this properly? God must be mad. It's like, no, no, no. Let's recognize that might be a lie. Let's reframe that and instead realize delay is not God's punishment. Delay is probably God's preparation for you. And so if you're praying for marriage, if you're praying for greater influence, if you're praying for impact, if you want greater leadership authority, if you want to be promoted, if whatever expansion that you are pursuing and seeking, then God's delay is probably not a punishment. It is probably preparation, because God is looking at that same situation and just saying, hey, are you strong enough to carry this massive blessing that I'm ready to pour out on you? And if his blessing is going to fracture us, then out of mercy, he's going to delay. He's going to strengthen our character in order to support and sustain the blessing of what he has for us. And in that delay, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for capacity increase before we come under the weight of blessing and crumble. It's a opportunity in terms of capacity increase for us to be better at emotional regulation or discipline without applause. Like, that's huge. Like, so many people, if they're not being applauded, then their discipline goes out the window. And when we are able to have discipline without the recognition and integrity without the recognition, when we have obedience without a public award or a public reward, then in those times, the Lord is crafting our character. And so I like to think about Abraham. He waited for Isaac, or Joseph was in prison for years before he was promoted. Moses was living out in the desert for 40 years before he went to deliver God's people. And so all these things to say that that biblical cycle, that pattern where it's calling, testing, commissioning, that testing part usually involves the wilderness. And it's like, hey, that's refining. Hey, that's an awesome invitation to expand capacity, to increase capacity in all these other ways, so that when we step into the commissioning, I'm fully capable and ready. I'm trained. I'm prepared. I can handle what God wants to bless me with. And so a way to fortify yourself is expect that testing, that delay may include obscurity. It's kind of like weight training for our destiny. And then it's like, thank God that he's merciful enough to withhold, to delay for a time, the thing that my current character would corrupt. If my current character would destroy the thing, God's like, hey, let me keep refining you. And then I'm going to give you more than, I'm just going to knock your socks off. So those are 2 points. The third one would just say faithfulness. Delay demands faithful action, not passive waiting around. And in Galatians 6, verse 9, let me read it to you. It says, Let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. Uh, and so basically, it's saying that delay is not an excuse to disengage, right? Let's not give up. And honorable savages, we don't sulk whenever the harvest doesn't show up on our timetable. It says, okay, I'm going to still show up. I'm going to continue to lead. I'm going to continue to be faithful. I'm going to practice discipline. I'm going to lead. I'm going to obey all the things, right? Even when nothing seems to be happening, because I realize that I rarely control the outcome, but I almost always have control over my inputs, AKA over my obedience. And it makes me think of Proverbs 21, which today is the 21st. Talks about how the horse is made ready for the day of battle, but victory rests with the Lord, which means I'm taking responsibility for my inputs. I'm going to make myself ready for the day of battle, but victory rests with the Lord, which means I'm going to trust him with the outcome. And so in that time of delay, I'm going to keep listening to the Lord. I'm going to keep my disciplined, life giving routine that's got my keystone habits, that's got obedience enabling systems. I'm going to keep doing the thing. I'm going to guard my covenant. I'm going to strengthen myself. I'm going to sharpen my skill set, and I'm going to serve others along the way, even when there's no spotlight. And so the due season, that belongs to the Lord, but daily obedience belongs to me. And if I were to quit during the delay, that can disqualify me from the harvest, right? Galatians 6, if I do not give up, I will reap the harvest in the proper time. And so I look at all this as delay is an opportunity for development in terms of my faithfulness, in terms of a capacity increase, in terms of growing my trust in the Lord. So those are my three things for you. Is the season of delay, it is a blessing in that it is an invitation to trust the Lord and renew my strength in him. It is an invitation for increasing my capacity before I step into the fullness of the assignment. And it is an opportunity to practice faithfulness, not to passively sit around, not to give up, but to say, I own my inputs and I trust the Lord with the outcome. And so that would be my encouragement for you is let's have dominion even in the delay. That's what I got for you, brother.